I really didn't want this to be my first ever proper video. In fact, the actual video is stuck in editing right now because I've been battling a really bad cold for a week, which you can absolutely hear in my voice. I apologize in advance, but I have to say something, because I'm not only sick but also tired of people trying to stand up for diversity, whether that's queer, disabled, or people of color, and painfully obviously not understanding the concept of diversity at all. And I hope I can change that at least for some of them in this video. As always, the link zu der deutschen Variante dieses Videos ist in der Videobeschreibung, as well as the written version in both English and German. Let's go! Hello world, I'm Elia, and I am, among other things, genderfluid. Sadly, I can't yet explain properly to you what that means, because I've got the EBUs, the broadcaster of the Eurovision Song Contest's, mess to clean up. On Thursday, the 14th of May in 2026, the second semi-finale of this year's Eurovision aired, and with it a very interesting choice of interim scene at about 33 minutes of the show. Sadly, I haven't found a solo upload of it on YouTube, so I will just link the whole semi-finale, and you'll have to skip to about 33 minutes after France's entry. I don't want to get a copyright strike in my first video, so I'll just summarize the next 3 minutes for you. The scene takes place at Eurovision University, an imagined place for people studying Eurovision, where Professor Eurovision is teaching a course. One student, Hugo, asks why there are so many quote-unquote gays at Eurovision, and if they have taken over the contest. The whole class erupts in laughter, and Professor Eurovision pitifully responds with, "Oh, Hugo." She continues to explain that most people performing, working, or producing at Eurovision are straight, as well as the people at home watching, because the majority of the human population is straight, exclaiming, "Straights everywhere." She continues that many gay and lesbians and all the other letters from the LGBTQIA+ are drawn to art and therefore performing on stage. She proposes the idea that it is easier and more natural to create something that stands out if you yourself already are different. She points out that of the 72 entries which have won Eurovision, only 8 are openly LGBTQIA+, and it would have been almost impossible to come out in 1956 when the contest began, but they'd have been a part of the family from the very start. Then she gives some examples, like Denis Dubuisson, who performed for France in 1956, or Jean-Claude Pascal from 1961, who later came out as gay. The first openly gay person to participate in the contest, Paul Oscar, did so in 1997, 41 years after Eurovision began. She goes on to show a comparison of the acts openly identifying as one of the rainbow letters, including JJ and Nemo, the winners of the last 2 years, and Conchita Wurst from 2015, against every act that doesn't, which are a lot more, and declares that she detected no takeover. She declares she does not think there are too many gays at Eurovision, but too many wind machines, off-keynotes, and weird costumes. Eurovision would be one big family, with men, women, and everyone in between. Most of them are straight, because that is how the world is, but she hopes that we will soon be able to replace every letter of LGBTQIA+ with just one, H, for human, not for Hugo. During her whole speech, the class seems very happy with what she's saying, like one big united mind, lots of smiles and nods, while Hugo, who gets called out for his question several times, seems very abashed and ashamed. After watching that, I felt very weird and uncomfortable, especially as a genderfluid person. I am sure, or at least I hope that I can be sure, that this was not the intended effect. I actually didn't realize just how bad this was until I watched the stream of ESC Gabe the next morning, where he called it out. Sometimes, especially if you're used to being treated badly, you just take it as a given and ignore it rather than question it to keep yourself sane. But after seeing there how many people were negatively affected by this, I had the courage to confront this experience again, because I knew I wasn't alone in it, and I knew I wouldn't be screaming into a void again trying to call this out. So thank you, Gabe. With this one question in front of maybe 5,000 people, you did more for me than all 3 minutes of this interim scene broadcasted to millions ever could. So, what is, or better are, the actual problems with the scene? In short, it is belittling, performative, exclusionary, hypocritic, misrepresenting, drawing false conclusions, exploiting queer people as tokens, and even dehumanizing, transphobic, biphobic, and queerphobic. In full, well, by the wooden, way too perfectly smile of Professor Eurovision, as well as the laughs, smiles, and nods of the class, this scene is trying to enforce thoughts and feelings in its recipients while shaming everybody who does not do it right, according to them. That in itself is antithetical to the concept of diversity, and even more importantly, shuns each viewer's ability to develop trust between the EBU and themselves, with such a personal thing as their sexuality, gender, romantic orientation, the actual intended purpose. They even seem to take pride in pronouncing every letter of LGBTQIA+, which to me reads as, look, we even say every one of your identities and don't shorten your horrendously long acronym. You can't just tell queer people that you are a queer-friendly person or organization who supports them and make them feel inadequate if they don't believe you. You have to actually be queer-friendly, and even then, it is for each individual to decide whether to trust you. By performatively stating as a fact that you are great and pretending everything else is objectively wrong, you take away the opportunity to disagree with you and criticize you, and therefore your own opportunity to grow and actually become better. But taking criticism and being open to change is the core of true support and a necessity for it. No queer person will love you more if you force this feeling onto them. They might start to fear you because they know you do not want to hear what they actually need or when you are hurting them. This is not a happy Eurovision family. This is the family where you keep to yourself until you move out because the performance of perfect inclusion crushes any potential of it actually happening and your voice to speak up for your needs with it. On the other hand, this also tries to enforce how you should be as a non-queer person. You are welcome, but if you so much as question anything, even out of innocent curiosity, you are wrong for it and should be ashamed. Wrong for being unsure, wrong for being curious, wrong for feeling your feelings and vocalizing your thoughts. This is not only unfair towards non-queer people, but also counterproductive towards building an open, inclusive world, because it takes away the ability to honestly communicate between two people of different groups. I understand that many queerphobic people intentionally use questions as a disguise of their own queerphobic comments to hurt others. They don't want answers, they just want to be cruel. And using Hugo to deliver such a question is, in general, not a bad idea at addressing it. The problem is the execution. Hugo does not randomly interrupt to scream into the class, he does not laugh or high-five his neighbor. In fact, as far as I can tell, he displays no signs of his question being insincere. He asks after Professor Eurovision has opened the room for questions and nobody else is stating one. He does not even ask her because she is queer, as her identity never comes up in any of the scenes with her. She asks her because she is the teacher and stated she is open for questions. Even though his vocabulary clearly is clumsy, he does not use slurs or mockery of any kind. He listens to her explanation, even while being mocked openly. To me personally, this sounds like someone who might have heard from a colleague or friend that Eurovision has been taken over by the gays and now tries to hear the other side of it. And of course, as a queer person myself, I too feel hurt by such questions, even when stated sincerely, because it ties into a deep queerphobic conspiracy designed to legitimize exclusion. It also hurts me seeing this on TV, even in a context where it is intended to be mocked. This hurt is real, and we have every right to it. But there is a huge, Delta Goodwin on a pedestal huge, Malta's garden pavilion that needed extra time to be assembled massive difference between an assault and an accident. The hurt is the same, your bones are still broken, but we would never ever send someone to prison for something that was out of their control. You might say that whether to ask this question was well inside Hugo's control. I disagree. The world is filled with misinformation regarding queer people. If you have grown up in a household with conservative people, and never had a close enough connection to any queer person growing up, you might very well be lost when it comes to that topic. A lot of education platforms are doing so in a way that kind of reverts the dynamic by making jokes at the expense of non-queer people or by letting their valid feelings against a cruel cis-heteronormative system get the better of them. It can actually be very hard to find a suited, calm conversation partner to explore one's uncertainties. There is one thing I will give the scene, and that is that this is a world full of non-queer people everywhere. And if we alienate the curious, maybe a little misguided ones, we will always be oppressed. Our voice will always be a minority. Despite this, if we truly want equality, we can't put ourselves on top of other people because of their sexuality, gender, or romantic identity. Not even a straight one. Doing so splits society on gender, sexuality, and romantic identity even more. When we can't genuinely ask each other about our respective experiences, boundaries, and needs, we cannot function as a society anymore, and the majority, which are non-queer people, will eventually take over and decide for us. This excludes queer people and non-queer people from each other, and therefore queer people from the majority of society. Airing this scene is also a kind of otherworldly hypocrisy. Just last year, in 2025, you have banned pride flags from Eurovision. All pride flags from all events, especially the stages. Do you seriously think I or anyone in the audience suddenly believes you are a happy Eurovision family where queer people are always welcome after doing that? We are not a pawn for you to be played or sacrificed to your liking. And if you treat us as such, we will remember. And you might not listen, but you will never gain our trust this way. No matter how many antithetical mini-propaganda movies you air in the countries you have chosen to air it to. Because yes, apparently there were countries, including the UK and even the host Austria themselves, who simply did not air this attempt at standing up for diversity and instead aired their scheduled commercials. I'm not sure what to think about that, to be honest. Either the countries had seen the film and recognized how problematic it is, or this is yet another case of pinkwashing, where they're trying to reap the benefits of the countries where being queer is supported enough, while avoiding the backlash it will produce in those where it is not. If you really want to stand up for diversity, just say something at a time and place where everyone can hear it, like the moderation or the talks during the voting. In addition to the belittling, division, and hypocrisy, this scene is also misrepresenting how many, where, and why there are queer people at Eurovision and what that means for the contest. They are stating that there are a lot of straight people at Eurovision because most of the people in the world are straight. And while correct, this also suggests that the queer percentage of people has arisen naturally, and this is blatantly false. First of all, you are not simply a queer person happening somewhere without there being fear, without there being problems, especially in such a production as Eurovision, where you have to work with so many different people. There will be someone you cannot read when it comes to being queer. Someone you are not sure what would happen if you were alone with them. In addition, you are given a massive international stage. This is great, but as a marginalized person, being seen can be risking your life. It doesn't matter if that's by law like in Russia or by societal movements such as the Worried Citizens in Germany. You have a target on your back if you are openly queer. And deciding to show that to the world, accepting someone will fire, is incredibly brave. Because once you are off the stage and Eurovision is over, everyone can see it. And no one has to protect you anymore. In addition, Eurovision does not seem to understand what a queer person is. So let me clarify. A queer person is someone whose sexual, romantic, or gender identity, as well as their medical sex characteristics, vary from being monogamous, straight, cisgender, and medically either male or female in some way at least one time in their life. Did you notice I did not say come out at any point? That is because you only have to identify yourself as queer to be queer. And while that makes the openly identified as queer category correct, it also falsely calls everyone else straight. Of course, there will be a lot of straight people in the straight category, naturally. But there will, especially with that many people, be someone who you call straight because they are afraid to out themselves. How many people from the straight category have actually confirmed being straight? And is making the outing necessary by publicly assuming their identity not the very opposite of true support? And I'm pretty sure there are and have been many artists who did not out themselves. Why? Because the numbers don't add up. There are different studies trying to pinpoint the percentage of queer people in the world, all with similar but slightly varying conclusions. Many factors, including being afraid to answer honestly, especially in countries with anti-queer legislation, are suppressing the true number. But it can be said that, very conservatively, at least around 11% of the public are queer in some way, whether that's trans, gay, intersex, genderfluid, or aromantic. In the article I'm referencing, there is an additional 11% of people who are neither clearly identifying as queer or not queer, which is why I have left them out of this very conservative estimate, because technically they might all identify as non-queer later in life. Also, not every straight person is not queer, because a straight transgender woman can still identify as straight, as well as a heterosexual, aromantic person, for example. That's why I kept referring to straight people as non-queer people. Personally, I would not be surprised if around 15 to 20% of people are queer in reality, but our conservative 11% are more than enough to prove that the EBU, despite its best efforts and banning pride flags, is not a safe place for queer people. In the film, they say that 8 of 72 winners are queer, which would be around 11.1%. That's great, right? Every queer person outed, according to statistics. Well, even on the first watch I have wondered why this one is not followed up by the statistic about every entry in Eurovision and only focuses on the winners, as every participant would be a much bigger statistical group and therefore be the way more accurate statistic, wouldn't it? So I checked. Out of around 1,750 entries ever performed at Eurovision, only 104 have at least one openly queer member. This equates to around 6%. That is around half the actual probable amount of queer people that dare to out themselves, whether at Eurovision or way later in life. This also means that, on average, about every second queer person performing at Eurovision did not even dare to out themselves to this day. That is, in my opinion, a really bad record, especially for presenting it alongside with the queers are drawn to the arts. To give Eurovision some grace here, of course, this has massively changed over the years, with almost no one coming out before the 2000s, and 4 of the 35 entries of 2026 equating again to around 11% being already out while performing. In addition, the societal consequences of a coming out would have been devastating in the 50s and 60s, so it's fair to say that staying closeted during that time is not Eurovision's fault. What is their fault is presenting it as if they have always been a safe space when they clearly are not. Even if someone outs themselves, this does not make them a safe space, only a safe enough space. What that means is different for everyone and varies from not being killed to not being hurt to not being insulted. And I hope we all understand that a space where you are not being insulted is not necessarily a safe space, just a safe enough space to take a huge risk. So please don't pretend Eurovision was a great space for queer people in the 60s, when it clearly was, like Western society, not. This taking of the braveness and power of queer individuals and exploiting it for your own gain is called tokenism. Nemo standing on stage with a non-binary flag is great, is empowering, and gives many, many people, including myself, hope for a future. But this is not caused by Eurovision. It is caused by Nemo themselves. Granted, Eurovision did not prevent that from happening, so they were not actively queerphobic in this one case towards this one person, but it is Nemo who has come out. It is Nemo who dared to be themselves in front of a world where people want them dead for existing. It is Nemo who gave us hope, and it is Nemo who will have to face the consequences. the good, the bad, and the life-threatening. And trying to take their credit while actively banning their flag for everyone else in the following year is simply preposterous and cruel. Eurovision has had openly queer people on stage because they are not actively banning them, which honestly is the bare minimum. You have openly queer people on stage because these queer people are incredibly brave and stand up against your remaining oppression. Please stop taking that from them and putting it onto yourself. Especially when you focus your self-parade so heavily on gays and lesbians, while mushing every other identity together as and all the other letters from the LGBTQIA+. This follows a decade-long tradition of erasure for every queer person who is neither gay nor lesbian, which in turn leads to current oppression of these identities even by queer people themselves. This includes stereotypes and insults along the lines of bi people should just decide whether they want to be queer or not, the denial that non-binary people exist, or movements like TERF or LGB without the T. The film focuses so heavily on being gay or lesbian that not a single other identity is explicitly named, except for queer, which technically can be a standalone identity, but in this context is only used as an umbrella term. Even when talking about other identities, euphemisms like somewhere in between are used, referring to intersex or non-binary people. Who knows, it's not named explicitly, and out of the 7 times a real or imagined person's identity is named, not one is called something different than gay, lesbian, or straight. And that is very telling of either the lack of knowledge that words like bi, trans, and inter are not insults, and you can actually use them while referring to people, or their unwillingness to actually acknowledge how diverse the participants, especially the ones in recent years, truly are. Moreover, by only including gender identities that fit men, women, and everything in between, you state male and female as the pillars of gender, ignore its true diversity by mashing everything else into a single category, and exclude everything that does not necessarily exist on the spectrum, like agender, xenogender, or bigender. This is a point that has been discussed in queer communities for years and could have been fixed easily, for example by saying, and every other gender. When you only take what you think is acceptable enough and leave out everything else, you discriminate and are not truly accepting, only pretending to be. When everyone has to fit into your 3 boxes, it does not matter if 2 of them are queer. You still want us to shrink for your comfort. You still want us to fit into your idea of the world. You want us to be your kind of queer, the right kind of queer, instead ourselves. And that is oppression disguised as allyship. Everything I've mentioned before is condensed in the final statement. A wish to replace every letter of LGBTQIA+ with just one, H for human. On the surface, this might sound like another version of everybody is human regardless of their identity, a point that is often made by queer people in fighting for our human rights, e.g. trans rights are human rights, or the famous design where the single letters of the word human are drawn in different pride flags. Sadly, what really is happening here is a dark and dangerous opposite. Replacing every letter of LGBTQIA+ with H suggests that the acronym is too long, too complicated, too much, and that we need to shrink into one. It does not celebrate the incredible diversity of queer identities. It purposefully erases it. And if we only replace the LGBTQIA+ letters as H, what does that mean regarding non-queer people? Why would they not need that label? Are they not the same kind of human as us? Do we not belong to them? Are we now only labeled as human, but not actually being it? The trans rights are human rights slogan is saying that trans people are human and should be treated as such. Shrinking gay, lesbian, queer, inter, and trans people into only being human and not gay, lesbian, queer, inter, and trans anymore would mean that you can only be human if you are not queer anymore. That being queer is at best a weird and natural quirk, and at worst something that costs you your humanity and your human rights with it. But we are, always have been, and always will be human. You have just failed massively to treat us as such. To the EBU, congrats. You have successfully dehumanized queer people and alienated non-queer people while trying to cater to everyone. How can I write a 7-page script about a 3-minute scene because there's so much queerphobia to discuss? I didn't expect much after the flag ban last year, but this... But that would probably have been
too epic to be true.
I hope next time I get to tell you something about being gender fluid. So stick around for even more.